In the 1980s, Hollywood cranked out films so explicit that entire governments banned them, studios dumped them, and even the Pope personally condemned one. We're talking movies that got firebombed in Paris, pulled from theaters at the last minute, and buried by their own distributors out of sheer embarrassment. These are the movies that, for one reason or another, the industry tried to bury as deep as possible. Bolero is one of those movies that pretty much everyone wanted to forget the moment it came out. This was Bo Derek starring as a 1920s heiress who spends the entire film trying to lose her virginity to some perfect lover. On paper, it's supposed to be erotic and glamorous. In reality, it was just embarrassing. The movie did about $9 million in the US, which technically covers the $7 million budget, but with the kind of marketing and infamy that followed, it was a loss all around. Critics destroyed it. 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, an F from CinemaScore, and a reputation for being just miserable to watch. Behind the scenes, the production was a disaster. Cannon kept pushing for even more explicit scenes, which didn't sit well with John or Bo Derek. Bo Derek actually tried to convince MGM's CEO to back their tamer version, but he hated it so much that MGM not only dropped the film, they broke off the entire Cannon partnership. That move, combined with Bolero's failure, helped push Cannon right into bankruptcy. And to make things even more uncomfortable, there's a scene involving a 14-year-old actress that's still controversial. That pretty much killed any shot it had at a real release. Most theaters wouldn't even touch it, and even the ones that did got hammered for showing it. No wonder everyone wanted this thing to disappear. Now this one, most people have never even had the chance to see. Kindergarten from Argentina is just notorious. The movie is set in a bizarre private kindergarten run out of a mansion, with the adults in the house getting up to some truly depraved stuff. At one point, they're burning cars, tormenting a comatose relative, and there's an unsimulated explicit scene between two adults, one of them a well-known actor. The main plot involves the female lead becoming obsessed with a young boy, making advances, and the whole thing just spirals. The controversy around Kindergarten hit before most people even saw a frame. In 1989, literally one day before it was set to premiere, Argentina's democratic government banned it outright. This is after the country's dictatorship ended, so this was the only movie censored by the New Democracy, which tells you something about how far it pushed things. The ban sparked an 8-year legal battle, and the film became infamous purely on the strength of press coverage and rumors. There was never a real theatrical release, just this cloud of scandal and outrage hanging over it. Private Lessons is a case where the studios kind of wish the money hadn't come in. It's an American sex comedy. Philly is left home alone and the new French housekeeper seduces him. On the surface, it's marketed like a bawdy comedy, but the whole thing is built around a setup. The housekeeper's being blackmailed into seducing the kid as part of an extortion scheme. What's wild is that despite all the moral panic, Private Lessons actually made a ton of money. $26 million on a $2 million budget, one of 1981's big surprise hits. In Europe, it played as softcore because of Sylvia Crystal's Emmanuel fame, but in the US, it slid by on that teen fantasy angle. But a lot of people saw it for what it was: creepy, irresponsible, just straight up uncomfortable. Complaints poured in. Producer Jack Barry was flooded with hate mail accused of glorifying child abuse, and the backlash was so strong that Private Lessons became the last movie he ever made. Hollywood may have cashed the checks, but nobody wanted to defend it after the fact. Hail Mary from Jean-Luc Godard is a modern retelling of the Virgin Mary story, but with Mary as a Swiss teenager working at a gas station and Joseph as a taxi driver. The film covers everything from school to basketball to a mysterious pregnancy. What made this film notorious wasn't just the nudity or frank depiction of Mary's life, it was the way it collided with religious tradition. Catholic and Christian groups everywhere erupted. The Pope himself, John Paul II, personally condemned the movie. In France, theaters were surrounded by hymn-singing crowds, and some were even hit with stink bombs. In some other countries, the movie was outright banned or pulled from festivals. Most theaters simply decided they didn't want the trouble and didn't book it at all. Godard just kind of shrugged at all the controversy. He said he wanted to explore divine mystery in a modern world, but there was zero interest in calming anyone down. The backlash did its work. Hail Mary became the kind of movie people whispered about, not something you could just buy a ticket for. Hollywood and half of Europe preferred just to pretend it never existed. Personal Best is an example of how a movie can get buried for all kinds of reasons, sometimes even before anyone has a chance to protest. It's a sports drama following Mariel Hemingway's character as a young track athlete who falls for her older teammate. It's one of the first American films to portray a same-sex romance this openly, but that's not what doomed it. The real trouble started behind the camera. Robert Towne, the legendary Chinatown screenwriter, made his directorial debut here. He wanted everything to be as authentic as possible, so much so that the shoot ballooned out of control, with Towne demanding real training, real track meets, and endless takes. Costs exploded, lawsuits piled up, and the production became legendary for its chaos. Towne even had to sell the rights to his next script, Greystoke: The Legend of Tarzan, just to keep the film alive. By the time Personal Best was done, the studio had lost all faith. Warner Bros. And the Geffen Company barely promoted it. It got a small release and vanished almost immediately. The film made less than $6 million on a $16 million budget and was, as one retrospective put it, abandoned by the studio and all but consigned to history. Class is one of those movies from the 80s that can't decide if it wants to be a wild sex comedy or some kind of deep drama about broken families. You get Andrew McCarthy as Jonathan, this shy, working-class kid who lands a scholarship at a fancy boarding school. Right away, he falls in with his troublemaking roommate, Rob Lowe's Skip. The usual prep school stunts happen, underwear hazing, sneaking out, all that, but then the movie takes a left turn. Skip sends Jonathan to Chicago to live a little. Jonathan meets a much older woman at a bar, has a steamy weekend, and then, as if things weren't awkward enough, finds out that she is Skip's mother. Critics just did not know what to do with this thing. The New York Times' Vincent Canby said it can't make up its mind about being comedy or drama, and in the end, he figured it failed at both. Audiences weren't impressed either. In the end, Class became one of those movies the studio tried to quietly bury, just not worth the trouble. Mulberry is something you almost never saw from Korea in the 80s. A full-blown erotic folk drama set in a rural village during Japanese colonial rule. The story's about a young woman whose husband spends all his time gambling. He leaves her on her own and she does whatever she has to do to survive, including selling sex with local men in exchange for food. The wives eventually revolt and things get out of hand fast. Within Korea, Mulberry actually wasn't suppressed at all. It won awards, even got a sequel. But once it started getting exported, especially on VHS, other countries slammed the door. Censors abroad saw the sex and violence and went straight to adults only, or just flat out banned it. So while Korea put it up on a pedestal, other countries tried to sweep it under the rug, one of those movies that became a ghost outside its home turf. Martin Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ is basically the gold standard for movies Hollywood tried to erase. It's not a standard Bible movie. Scorsese went for a very human Jesus, somebody who struggles, doubts, even wants a normal life. The infamous dream sequence where Jesus comes off the cross, marries Mary Magdalene, has kids, and lives a regular life sent religious groups into meltdown. This wasn't a quiet controversy. Scorsese first tried to make the movie with Paramount in the early 80s, but after massive pressure from evangelical groups, Paramount just killed the project. Years later, Universal picked it up, but as soon as they announced it, the firestorm started. Months of angry letters, campaigns, and in August 1988, protests everywhere. Universal was forced to go with a super limited release, surrounded by security. In LA alone, 25,000 protesters showed up at the studio gates. In France, it went even further. A Paris cinema showing the film was firebombed. People were injured. It made headlines worldwide. Hollywood tried to stay as far away from this one as possible. The controversy ended up swallowing the film. Even though Scorsese got an Oscar nomination for Best Director, the movie was basically treated as radioactive, just easier for everyone to pretend it never happened. This is one of those 80s films that the US tried to sanitize out of existence. You've got Kim Basinger and Mickey Rourke, a relationship that starts off exciting and just gets more twisted as it goes along. Basically, a softcore art film that ended up making the studio nervous. MGM found the original cut way too explicit for American theaters, so they shelved it for over a year, made heavy edits, and finally released a toned-down version. The US got the PG-13 version of a movie that was anything but. American critics were not impressed. Most of them called it pretentious, softcore nonsense with no real story. Audiences mostly ignored it. It pulled in under $7 million against a $17 million budget. But in Europe, complete opposite story. They got the uncut version, embraced it, and the film ended up making over $100 million internationally. Risky Business is another case of Hollywood self-censorship, not because of the sex, which is what everyone remembers, but because of the tone. The basic story is pure 80s. Tom Cruise is a straight-laced kid who turns his parents' house into a temporary brothel and falls for a call girl. Wild premise, a lot of controversy at the time, but what's more interesting is what happened behind the scenes. Director Paul Brickman wanted to end the movie on a darker, more cynical note. His cut didn't give Cruise's character the big win. It was more satirical, more of a warning shot at American ambition. But after test screenings, Warner Brothers panicked. They made Brickman shoot a new, upbeat ending. Brickman and Cruise both fought to keep the original, but the studio wasn't having it. In the end, Risky Business became a massive hit, but only after the studio stripped out its original bite.